contributor, looks like, okay, lines and files, right? So,
Can you share your screen?
oh
Maybe
yeah,
show us what you're looking at.
sure. I'm just kind of scrolled down a little bit on notes that I shared earlier. Let me get this over here so that you can see it. But so I just kind of went through it. The first item on the agenda is to look at action items from the previous time. I haven't finished mine and Dawn's not here, so maybe we could start some of that. And then Daniel and I are both here. We're talking about lines and files, and I think there were some proposed metrics in common. Daniel, correct me if I'm misremembering. There were some
Yeah.
proposed common metrics on lines and files.
Yeah, so what I've done has to check the evolution working group. So then I found the one related to lines. I didn't find any related to files.
Okay.
So that one missing. This is also, I didn't know how to proceed in the sense of, should I go and create lines, or should I create this one in evolution for files as well? Or
So lines does exist in evolution, files doesn't. I think it's I don't know. My tendency would be to try to put things that seem to me to be obviously similar in the same working group. However, what I think is obviously similar may not be what you think is obviously similar. So I'm going to ask what others think. So the question is, there's metrics around the files included in is this at the commit level or the pull request level, Daniel, that you're thinking about this, or both?
I didn't consider any of them, so I assume,
okay.
I guess, Git repository, so commit level in this case.
Okay, so there's two places where lines of code and files included in a code can be counted easily. One is in a pull request or review request. The other is in the commit itself. And each commit and each pull request contain a number. Usually a pull request rolls up a number of commits, but each of those typically contains a number of lines of code changed in aggregate and a total number of files changed in aggregate. And looking at the trends for lines of code changed and files changed over time is a metric that people are interested in, and we measure these things in Augur and tables. We have commits. The lines changed and the files changed are in the commits table, and the pull request commits are in a pull request commits table, and the pull request files are in a pull request files table, and all of that lives. And so we think about it when we're programming it as one thing, but what do other people think about when they think of those metrics? Are those things that we should think about under common? Does it matter whether or not we put, so are lines and files the same kind of thing? Should they be in the same working group? Does that matter? I don't know. I'm going to shut up now and let people answer.
I'm not totally following. There was a lot.
Okay.
There.
So let's start with, if things seem similar in general to metrics that are, or closely related to metrics that already exist in one working group like evolution.
Yeah.
Do we want to try to keep metrics like that in the same working group on just that principle, at the principle level? What do we think?
So like there's a similar metric in evolution with respect to lines and files.
Right. So yes.
And so the question is, do we just keep it in evolution and work it out there, or move it, or duplicate it? Is it?
Or, well, I think, so we've got an interesting, so there are two cases. If we use this as an example of Daniel and I providing an object lesson or question to the community, in the case of lines of code, there already exists a metric in evolution. In the case of files, a metric doesn't exist anywhere.
Okay.
So around I guess the question could really be just in the air. So if a metric already exists, do we just point to it, or do we want to try to say we should put it somewhere else at some point?
I would suggest, since lines and files are very similar, like trying to measure something along the same line, so it should be in the same domain. for the convenience.
By domain, you mean working group in this case?
Like, yeah, oh yes, in the same working group. Because lines and files to me are like two different angles of the same measurement.
Mm-hmm. What do others think? Any opinions? I mean, Daniel, what do you think?
I was perhaps trying to have the question in some other way. So, for instance, Matt or Vinod or others. So we have to deal with files, lines of code. We have realized that lines of code are in evolution working group, but we are now in the common working group. What would you do if we need to open? Because we need to open a new metric, files. Where would you go? Which is the other way around.
I guess
Right.
the question is that if files is something we think would be, this is my opinion anyway, if files is something we think would be common across the groups, then it should go in common. But if it's something that's going to only be specific to evolution, then I think it should go in evolution. But that's just my opinion.
So yeah, so what in that case, what's the common argument? So just, I think there was a comment. So basically what we're looking at here is metrics in the common working group, metrics that can have, that can be used by other working groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so lines of code is currently sitting in evolution. So why is that a common metric? How would risk use it? Or how?
So risk does consume metrics from a lot of the working groups, certainly a lot of evolution metrics, but we do have a different set of questions that we're asking. So we might use the same metrics to look at a contributor, parameterized or filtered edition of that metric. So risk is a big consumer of common and evolution metrics, and a developer of lines of metrics around licensing and testing and code quality, although there's some code quality metrics in evolution. Risk's an interesting example, though.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion here, so I don't mind working in here or in evolution working group. Yeah.
I guess I was the one that asked the question, and I only asked it because I'm thinking from the point of view of a consumer of our metrics. If all the things that I get from a GitHub repository effectively are already in evolution, except for commit files or pull request files,
mm-hmm.
then it would be odd to me as a person entering our community for the first time to find a piece of that analysis pie in a different working group. Because I think of the working groups as partly as a newcomer, a classification system that we've created.
Then the same will go for the fork also, because that is a piece of GitHub information also.
And forks is actually, you're right. But forks is a little bit different because it's not from the Git repository. Typically, it is from the hosting platform. And there were 3 working groups that are interested in that metric: risk, evolution, and common. So forks is interesting to a lot of different working groups. And in that specific case, I could see where it's platform specific. It's not, you can't get forks from a Git repository, and you've got 3 working groups actively interested in it. So in that case, I might say common. But I don't know, this is my brain. I'm not saying I'm right.
Yeah, to me, it's not super clear how lines and files would relate to diversity and inclusion, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, so in that regard, I think maybe it doesn't belong in common, because I feel like common should be something that is common to everyone, or maybe like 4 out of 5, you know, so, or I guess 3 out of 4 other groups. So that would just be my question: is what would be the motivation to move it to common? I think Matt asked that also. So And to me, it's not super clear. And also value, I'm not really sure how that directly ties. Maybe it does, but right at this moment, I don't see how it directly ties to value.
I think value's mission as a working group is more distinct and clear these days than it was 6 months ago.
If I look at the common metrics that are released or under review at the moment, the focus areas of what, when, and who. So it's pretty high level things like time to first response, which could be for an issue, to a pull request, to an email, to, whatever. Time to close, which again is applicable to a variety of different things. Lines of code seems pretty specific.
Yeah.
To the point that it seems like it should stay in evolution for me.
And what about files, which is the new metric?
Same.
Okay.
That's just my take. But
I think most of the people are for evolution working group, so I can work there. That's okay.
Okay. All right. So I'm just gonna copy this, and I don't know if anybody. Let's see. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Agenda. Do we have agenda? Is agenda and notes? Agenda notes. Okay, it's the same thing.
So I saw that Stefka had said that feeling lost but hopeful. So basically what we're trying to do here is each of these working groups.
I think she left.
Is
or maybe, no, she didn't. She didn't. Okay. Never mind. As the sharer, I don't see everybody. Sorry.
So each of the working groups is trying to identify metrics that are kind of appropriate for their area of interest. So D&I defines metrics that are important to diversity and inclusion. Risk identifies metrics that are important to risk, value, so on and so forth. Common is a slightly different working group in that we had found that across the working groups, there were some kind of common characteristics that each of the working groups shared. Things usually associated with time or people's location, things that were common across all working groups. So that was the kind of the idea of starting the common working group. So when we're in D&I, we're looking solely at D&I things. When we're in risk, we're looking solely at risk things. And we're in common, it's a little bit harder because we're trying to identify metrics that could have importance to all other working groups.
Yeah, thanks. And it makes sense because otherwise there will be a lot of overlap of the work that
exactly. So, yep. So we're trying to identify that overlap and then do the work just here in this working group. I will say, I find common to be the most confusing or hardest to grapple with working group because it has implications to other working groups.
It started out as the land of misfit toys, and I think that's not a bad description.
Right. So when we're in D&I and we're coming up with D&I metrics, it's usually pretty clear that this is a diversity and inclusion metric specific to having a better understanding of D&I, whatever that metric might be. But common, it's just really hard sometimes. I don't know if I'm the only person that feels that way, but
yeah, I do, and it's like I think common started out because we had these metrics that didn't really fit in the other working groups, and if we think of it that way, then if a metric logically fits in one and mostly one other working group, then probably it goes there. If it's like forks where you have interest from 3 working groups, that is a different thing entirely. Right? Because now you have multiple working groups that are interested in this metric, and maybe that is the very definition of common.
Right, like forks might be a good signal for the evolution of a project. Forks might be a good signal on the risk of a project, depending on how you look at forks.
Yep.
And so that ends up here in common.
I stepped on my shoelace and untied my shoe, so I had to turn around and tie it because I kept tripping on it.
That was quick. You're a
Yeah.
fast shoe tire.
I am. I learned that when I was in kindergarten, and
It's probably just Velcro is what it is.
I still use Velcro. Yeah. Okay. So I think we hit a decision on those that we'll keep lines of code in common and add files. And I said commit files and review pull request files to evolution because they're both interesting. And you can just do commit files if that's what you're mostly interested in right now, Daniel.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the next thing was to look at any PRs and issues. Just moving right along. So these are the release notes. Types of contributions released under
Continuous.
What is CMC continue? Oh, okay.
The continuous metric cycle.
Release. Okay. All right, CMC. Got it. All right, so that's nothing.
And Stefka, just so you know, that CMC, those are, in case you're not familiar with that, that's those are metrics that we release kind of in between the big releases, which is what we're doing right now. So we're getting ready to release a big chunk of metrics, but we only do those once every 6 months. So in the middle, there might be a few that come up that we just go ahead and kind of pre-release, like a soft release. And then we'll lump them into the big releases as well. But that's what that CMC refers to, or any of those.
Yeah. And when does the review period end? Is it July 23rd? It's in my head for some reason.
Yeah, I think it's the month of, it's late July.
It was the 23rd, but we pushed it back because we needed more time to prepare the release candidate. So I think now it's this July 31st.
So the review period, and that's exactly the same day that it ended last year, I think, or maybe it was June. I don't remember. No, it must have been June because otherwise it wouldn't have worked. Review period ends July 31st. I'm just going to make a note of that. Okay, so that addresses that agenda item. I guess I should look really quick and just see if there's any new issues that got created. Nope. And any new pull requests? Nope. Doesn't surprise me a whole ton, but always
go back to issues though. So, and if you look at, can you click on release candidate comments time to close?
Yes.
So if you scroll, I don't know if there's any comments on this.
Changed it from it looks like you changed it from what it was to what it is.
Yeah, I was just asking
exactly
if
the same. Not sure what's different.
It looks like there's no comments here.
Yeah.
No comments.
Yeah.
So go back. And then click on the number
60.
56. Yeah. So scroll up a little bit. April 7th.
Yeah, this was an in-between one that I thought we released.
Oh, okay. So are all of these issues
I think these are all,
to?
yeah. I thought this metric had been released in between.
Yep, that's correct.
So that's fine. Just making sure there's no additional comments. That's all.
Okay, all right.
Do we have a label or some way to indicate?
Metrics release candidate.
I mean, do we have for like a
release?
CMC? Do we have like a label for that, just so we kind of know?
So
That would
regarding
be a good label.
regarding the CMC, Kevin has been working on the workflow, and we have a pull request. I don't know if it got accepted yet to update the handbook, how it works. So the way the CMC works is metrics that we are preparing for the next release can be added to our website at any point. And all metrics go through this getting ready for the release. And then the review period stays open until the release. And this is slightly different from what we were doing before, where we had 1 month review period. Just to simplify the process, we just say the review period stays open until the public release, because that way we eliminate the opening and closing and changing status back and forth. When a metric is ready to be released at any point, we can add it to the website, we can start the review period, and then 1 month before the release, we close that window for adding new metrics to the website. And that is our traditional release candidate period, review period, where 1 month it's only reviews, no new metrics. So that is how I understand the process can work in the future.
So something that was ready to go, say in September, would just have like a 4-month review period, or whatever, you know, like a multi-month review period.
So
Okay.
wait a minute, but we're still releasing them interim. We're not making a 4-month review period. That's not the intention of the continuous metrics process.
They are publicly released on the website, just like
Okay.
a candidate.
But they get tagged in the next, so they're sort of like CMC metrics, sort of they get tagged in the next full release.
Correct.
As being part of that release, but they don't necessarily have to go through like I'm going to treat things that were released in CMC very differently in terms of comments than I will things that are brand new in this release period. Like I'm going to, as a participant, I think about those things as basically being released and reviewed, that they don't require attention from me right now.
I don't know if you want to have this conversation in the common working
Yeah,
group.
yeah, I don't know. It affects our, I guess we need to understand, just to the extent of what are we asking people to review? Are we looking at continuous metrics releases and the new metrics, or
Yes.
mostly yes. So a continuous metric release is getting reviewed both during the interim period and at the end?
Yes.
Here,
It
I
just-
don't like that idea. I think that that sort of eliminates the purpose of the continuous metrics release by saying
They are still released.
Uh-huh.
They're still on the website.
Mhm.
It's just the public comment, the ability to comment on it is just longer. So that's just a burden that the CMC carries.
Okay. All right. As long as it's publicly released and it can be referenced, that's the main thing.
It can.
The URLs
yes.
won't change.
They will not.
Yeah. Then that's
It's
fine.
part of it is just the overhead for Kevin to do all of this management is really high.
Got much higher than we thought. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we need to simplify the process a little bit. So it can't be perfect at every corner.
Perfect. Got it. Thank you. Now it's clear to me, hopefully to others as well. Then there was a question about the next thing on the agenda is discuss release and review progress on the metric spreadsheet. And a particular question came up about contributor employer location. And it's very similar to contributor location. And I don't know if we want to discuss that or we want to sort of table that until another. So it's kind of, I guess I will check the temperature of the group here. Do we want to talk about that or not?
I'm happy to take a look at anything when we have the time.
So it's I don't think it exists yet. I'll open up the metric spreadsheet and validate that.
So maybe again for Stefka. So we have this metric spreadsheet, and you'll see the tabs across the bottom which correspond to every working group. And this allows us to kind of keep track of which metrics have been released in each working group and what the state of work is for particular metrics that we might have an interest in releasing per working group.
So the states are basically the orange would be the things that are under community review in this release.
I
And
love the color coding. It really helps me
do we
better see.
we do have things under review this release, don't we? Feels like something's not properly coded in the spreadsheet because I don't see anything under community review here.
You're correct. So real quickly here, I'll tell you. So types of contributions is under review.
Okay, but that's one that was, okay, so this is where it gets confusing because that was released. So does it go into?
Yeah, so this has like been on my forever to-do list just to make a new thing.
Yeah, under community,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, all right, let's just not even discuss it further. Got it. Okay, under community review types of contributions.
Yep. Time to close.
Okay.
And contributor location, which is under who.
Okay, so that is,
Yep.
so, and contributor location is where the question arose, which is, actually the question arose as, sorry, employer location. So somebody raised the question of a metric about employer location and whether or not that is similar or redundant with contributor location. And this is the definition of contributor location, which is geographical location that people contribute from.
Yeah, so the employer location was going to differentiate where the company is actually located, irrespective of where the person is.
Mm-hmm.
So Google being in Mountain View, I don't care where the person is located, but we know that this is a
Right. So
California-based company.
Yeah, so I'm not mining a Git log to get the organizational location, whereas in all likelihood I am to get the contributor location.
Right. So it's whether or not we care to understand VMware, location, Google, like whether it's California, East Coast, Europe, Asia, wherever it may be.
And really, I mean, most of these organizations have offices or major development shops all over the globe. So does it matter that Google's headquartered in Mountain View? Is that relevant to anything?
To me, it's not.
Yeah.
But there could be use cases where somebody can see it differently than me.
We can delay developing the metric until someone comes along with a good use case.
Okay.
I think it would also be tricky to differentiate between people's personal contributions versus what is under the company umbrella and things like that. Like, I think it could get a little fuzzy.
I like that fuzzy. So is the agreement just to table this metric on employer location until we have somebody that's driving it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to put that in there. And then, Vinod, did you add this forks metric at the bottom to discuss it?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to jump over to Vinod's proposed metric for forks. For those of you new, Stefka, others, this is just markdown format in a Google Doc. So if it looks a little goofy, that's why. So you want to walk us through it, Bernard?
Yes. So for the folks, the question for this metric is what are the number of folks for an open source project? So the fork is perceived differently for the different groups, but mainly it's the count of folks that is evaluated. Or there any other perspective, any thoughts? I wrote this from the perspective of, okay, how many folks for an open source project or a repo there are. That helps to assess the risk or so. Then, so like that's where I've added the implementation parameters, like show the folks count, total folks over the period of time as an aggregator. I tried to find the visualization on the Augur, but I couldn't find that, so I haven't pasted any image.
For forks, it's
Yes.
on the risk tab. If you go under an individual repository, it's under risk.
Okay.
It could be generally at the repository head too, but I think because there was interest from risk, we biased where we put it to risk. And at the moment in time that we put that on a page. So
in the objective, I've clarified like why people fork the project, what are the reasons for that, and why we look at this particular thing. Especially
like I mean, there's kind of the project is interested in the number of forks because it's looked at as the potential number of future contributors or people who are interested. It's an interest level indicator.
But there's
materially though, those forks could be there for many different purposes. Like sometimes I create a fork just to have a stable version of a project that I refer to. So I refer to my fork instead of the root, so I can control when change happens.
From a project, oh, sorry, Vino. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, so I wanted to bring to discussion. Sorry, I had to leave for some minutes, so maybe you've already discussed about this. But there might be a specific use case, and I remember I had this question on the table some years ago, which is, so let's assume we have a project and there are some forks around, but then that specific project, for any reason, tends to die or to decline somehow. So what's the next place I should go to keep working in this project? So what's the best fork? Maybe for instance, we have OpenOffice, and then suddenly we have a fork. So we have LibreOffice. That was before the GitHub era, let's say.
I call that a hostile fork. Like I'm forking your project and I am never going to merge it again. I am going off on my own, like MariaDB and LibreOffice kind of did from MySQL and OpenOffice.
Yeah, exactly. But from if there are two forks in parallel working, where should I go, right? So who's forking who and so on. So that specific use case might be useful and perhaps a kind of a next step to the existing question we have there.
I can also say from a value perspective, I think this is an interesting question because I know there are some like projects for social good that are meant to be forked and localized. So like it's almost like a template where they've set up something for local data collection or local good that they say, okay, we were doing this like in San Antonio or whatever, take this project and apply it in your own cities. So I think it can also, from a value perspective, indicate something that is useful and it's meant to be forked. So I don't know that it necessarily has to be something that's seen as a bad thing.
So and so I guess the question is there ever are there two main use cases, or is that an oversimplification to say that sometimes it's forked and you're expected to do different things with it and never return? the code, and sometimes it's forked with the explicit intention of making a contribution to the code. Are those, I don't know, I don't have a good sense of how common each of those reasons for making a fork might be. I don't know if anybody else does.
I think that sounds right. And I also think that this is kind of where we would maybe leave it up to the projects to decide for their own purposes, if a fork is good or bad, if they want to see more forks or if they want to see less forks. So that might be in the implementation of the metric.
Yeah,
And,
I mean,
go ahead, Georg.
I've been going through editing this with the idea in mind that what we are talking about are GitHub forks, and to recognize that GitHub forks are not the community forks or the hostile forks. They could be, but that we don't know if someone creates a fork on GitHub, what their intention is. We don't know what they are contributing back or want to contribute back.
right, but we could measure that with pull requests.
We can. So what my proposal would be to call it GitHub forks to make it clear that's what we're measuring.
Is there not, there's a similar concept on GitLab though. Is there not?
There might be, I don't know what GitLab calls it.
Yeah, I think that's important though, because for example, with pull requests, we created the general construct of a review in evolution way back when, because it's a generic word for the two different kinds of distributed cert version control code contributions that I can make as a non-core member of a group. I can do a pull request from my fork, or I can do a review. So I could do both of those things in GitLab and GitHub, and they call them different things. I think they're called merge requests in GitLab, if memory serves.
I've shared the link for the GitLabs, how to fork a project.
Looking at my chat window.
Yep. Okay, so GitLab also calls it forks.
That's convenient.
So that means we should not stick to the platform and keep it generic. I was thinking of like in the objectives, we have like reasons for fork as a separate like explanation that, okay, people do fork for this 2, 3, 4, whatever the reasons can be, which is like copying it, contributing back, replicating, or not contributing back.
Yeah, I think you could add, I made some edits. I think Georg, Anonymous Tiger, I don't know if that's Georg or somebody else. I see Georg link. Georg's made a bunch of edits to this. Objectives. Technical forks. People just want it to be called forks or technical forks.
So my concern is that we need to somewhere explain that there are two types of forks. There is the fork that we do in our software development practices on GitHub, GitLab. And then there are the community forks or the hostile forks. And
well, we can't. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I raised that, or Dan. So I went and looked, and like, so we know MariaDB is a hostile fork, right? Like it's a prominent hostile fork. But when you look at its source repository, it's now under GitHub in the MariaDB organization as the project server. So it doesn't have a source repository. The construct of a fork technically doesn't exist. So this will be the reason for your technical forks, right? You're trying to narrow the scope of this to technical forks and scope out the hostile forks where I disconnect from head and start again. You want those to not be part of this metric when you say technical forks. Am I getting that right, Georg?
I think doing that would create more clarity.
I agree. Yeah, because then we don't have to talk about LibreOffice or MariaDB. We're really talking about technical forks. And now apparently Google is, did somebody change the size of that, or is Google respecting the
I'm doing
oh, so,
that.
okay. You're just messing with me, man. All right, yeah, I think technical forks is, do the other people agree that it adds more clarity and removes some of the ambiguity around these hostile forks that we were discussing a minute ago?
Yeah, I'm fine if it's easier to differentiate it there as opposed to in the narrative.
Yeah, because I think, I think it is. I think it disambiguates at the title level, and that's probably better.
Quick comment. I was having a look at Google Scholar, looking for academic papers because I remember a couple of them. No, I didn't remember a couple of them, so I was looking for them. And then when looking for fork open source, it was interesting to see some keywords related to this sustainability of open source software, communities beyond the fork, and then long-term sustainability of open source software communities beyond the fork, which are both related to LibreOffice. Then,
so they're addressing the challenge of you're diffusing your contributors across two projects instead of focusing them on a single one when you create that hostile fork. Is that their point?
so it seems that in academia, people were using the concept of fork to analyze sustainability of the new fork versus the previous version and how things were around. The motivations to fork, that's another area, and those motivations may bring perhaps some more questions here in the forks, or at least for if we only focus on technical forks, that's a bit different. And because there are some specific ones as how to avoid a fork or think before you fork, which is interesting as well. And yeah, and then there is another. Oh, this was one of the ones I had a look at, which is what the fork, a study of inefficient and efficient forking practices in social coding. Maybe some of them. So might be worth having a look at this, or just to improve or having some certain references.
Yeah, I'll put this in the doc if nobody's done it already.
Sean, I think you also had mentioned at one point that the clone data is not available through the API.
Right. So you can only get clone data if you have maintainer privileges on a repo. Otherwise, if it's not your repo, you can't get clone data, even if it's public, for whatever reason.
So I think just by virtue of that, like we can maybe just set aside the fork clone kind of issues that there might be or ambiguity and just focus on forks.
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad idea to reference it in the references, but I don't.
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
I agree. I don't think we need to.
What does GitLab have in their API? Is that are forks? I don't know much about the GitLab API, but does anyone know if that's in there?
And it's not a clone.
I don't know.
It's a distributed copy. So it's fundamental to Git is this idea that you can distributed copies. It's branches, and when you add a platform, it can be forks. But it's not a clone. A clone is a different thing, I think.
Going to your point, Elizabeth, you have coming from the API, you have forks, stars, and watchers, as far as I remember. Then clones, downloads, and something else. You need to go through what Sean mentioned, so through being a maintainer, etc.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, that makes it easier that they're similar. Okay.
Yeah, I think the reason maybe that clones are closer to the revenue model of many companies, and it would let you have competitive intelligence that not everybody, that might discourage people from participating in a platform if they gave away how many people are cloning it. That'd be my guess. Actually, we made some progress on this. I think we have a minute left. If I'm supposed to be facilitating, I will take a minute to point that out. Are there any other things that we want to discuss in this working group today, or things we want to finish in our work on the technical fork metric?
No, I think I'd like to encourage people who have open action items to consider how those can move forward in the next 2
Yeah,
weeks.
yeah. Roger that.
And that would be it for me.
Okay. All right. I bid you all farewell and a happy July 9th.